Thank you all for joining us this morning. I would appreciate you taking the time out to join us for this discussion. And I'd like to introduce our guest for today, Dr. Nashlie Sephus. I think we're still having issues with the video, but I'll go ahead and make the introduction. There we go. There's Nashlie. Dr. Nashlie Sephus is the Applied Science Manager for Amazon's Artificial Intelligence Initiative, focusing on fairness and identifying biases in technologies. She formerly led the Amazon Visual Search team in Atlanta, which launched visual search for replacement parts on the Amazon shopping app in 2018. This technology was a result of a former startup, Part Pick, based in Atlanta, being acquired by Amazon, for which she was the Chief Technology Officer. And prior to Part Pick, she received her PhD from the School of Electrical and Computer Engineering at the Georgia Institute for Technology in 2014. She worked a year with Exponent Technical Consulting firm in New York City. Her core research areas were digital signal processing, machine learning, and computer engineering. She received a BS in computer engineering from Mississippi State in 2007. Dr. Sephus is a Jackson native and a 2003 graduate of Murrah High School and Power APAC. She's had several internships and research experiences worldwide with companies such as IBM, Delphi, University of California at Berkeley, GE Research, GE Energy, Miller Transporters, and Kwangwon University in South Korea. Recently, Dr. Sephus became the founder and CEO of The Bean Path, a nonprofit organization based in Jackson that assists individuals with technical experience and guidance. During her leisure time, she enjoys playing tennis, playing the piano, listening to music, bargain hunting, biking, and DIY projects at home. Welcome and good morning, Dr. Sephus.
Thanks so much for the introduction and thanks for having me.
We are happy to have you. Thanks for being here with us. Nashlie, will you start out by telling us, today the discussion is centered around recruiting top technical talent for your startup. And as we've heard from your bio, you've got experience in the area and we can't wait to hear all the knowledge you have to share. But tell us a little bit about how you came to be the Chief Technology Officer for Part Pick.
Okay, so as you mentioned, I was actually at Georgia Tech at the time, working on my PhD in computer engineering, and my expertise was machine learning and artificial intelligence, so things like speech recognition, music recognition, image recognition, and a lot of the technologies that we use today in our phones and in things like Alexa and Siri. And so I was working on the PhD, and a friend of mine actually introduced me to Jewel. And I remember, so Jewel Burst was the CEO of the company Part Pick. That was the name of the startup. And so she needed someone to help with that area of expertise in machine learning, and I was the person to help out with that. And so we ended up building a prototype. She was able to take that and raise, our seed funding. For those of you who have startups, you know about the seed round and the friends and family round. We always say our friends and family didn't really have a lot of money, so we had to skip that round kind of. But she was able to raise the seed round of I think it was 1.5 million or 1.2 million. And so we were able to build the company. So and during this time I had actually finished my PhD, going on to New York City, where I was working at a consulting firm. And then when I got the call that she had raised the money, I went ahead and put in my 2 weeks notice and came back to Atlanta to be the CTO of that startup.
Awesome, that's a great story. I've heard several tidbits in that description, but let's step back just a second. Tell us or describe for us in your words, what is the role of the CTO? What are the responsibilities there?
Right, so the CTO is a really key person in the startup world. And so at least I like to think so, especially if you have a tech startup. But even if you don't have a tech startup, as we preach all the time with my nonprofit, The Bean Path, technology is pretty much everywhere. It's almost hard to avoid it. And so you kind of need someone to kind of guide you through that technical piece. And so I like to think of the CTO as, if you're thinking about, let's take sports, let's take football, for example. I like to think of the CTO as the quarterback. So the quarterback, takes what the coach is saying. So the coach would be kind of like the CEO or the advisors of the company. And then the quarterback's job is to execute. Whatever that roadmap, whatever the quarterback usually helps with the plays and what's going to happen. And so with that, if you score, great, the CTO wins, the company wins, but if you don't, usually the quarterback's the first one to get blamed. And so it's really important to, it's a lot of responsibility on the CTO in terms of, you're managing the tech team, you're helping with the technical roadmap, you're the one that's informing the CEO, which may be non-technical. In most cases, the CEO is non-technical. You're informing them about the technology, about cutting edge technologies and research that may be able to apply to what you're doing. And then, of course, you're just kind of making decisions about what features do we release next, which can be very key to, how your business pivots or if it fails or succeeds. So yeah, a lot of responsibility as CTO.
Okay. And you mentioned a little bit about the relationship with you and Jewel. You guys happened to meet, and you said that you didn't come on as CTO until she raised the money. So is there a specific time when you reach out and when you need a CEO and when you need to CTO, when you need to bring that on, or and if so, what do you do in the meantime while you're raising the money and trying to find the funds to pay a CTO?
So I guess in our case, we sort of bootstrapped it. Jewel, the CEO, and then she had some funding coming in here and there, also winning pitch competitions. And so really no one was really full-time, like having full-time salaries until, so we started around 2013. This wasn't until 2015, so almost 2 years. And so until then, you had people like me contributing to building the product. I remember the very first prototype, I was actually a graduate student at Georgia Tech, and I was working on my thesis in the daytime, and then I was working on the technology for the startup in the evening, and it was just like 16-hour days. But sometimes, as people who are technologists, like sometimes it's best to work at night anyway, because you're a lot less is going on, a lot less interruptions. You can just get a lot more done, uninterrupted train of thought. And so we were just kind of contributing here and there where we could, using funds that she may have had, or just bootstrapping, or in exchange for, just equity or sometimes free meals, especially, as a college student or grad student. And so I think CTO doesn't necessarily have to be a full-time person. You do sometimes want that person to be in-house, though. That's usually the recommendation from investors and people who advise companies, that they want to see, especially if it's a tech company, they want to see somebody technical in the full-time role, fully committed, because they're thinking, okay, if you don't have a CTO who can commit, then why should I as an investor commit? And so again, I know sometimes people say, okay, well, should I have a part-time CTO? Should I have a contract worker as a CTO, or should I bring them on full-time? I think you have to do whatever is best for you and your business at that any given time, because I can't say, okay, well, yeah, you should definitely have somebody full-time, which I think that is most ideal case, but a lot of times that's just not possible. Maybe you don't have the funds, or maybe you haven't found that right person that's a good fit for the job. And maybe some people, they have contractors and they're doing fine. I tell people when we were first starting out, we went through several contractors. Contractors are hit or miss, though, I will say, especially if you're outsourcing overseas. Sometimes there can be communication barriers and problems if you're not located in the same place. But at the same time, there can be some very great contract workers that may be able to fill that CTO role. But so it really just depends, a lot of different scenarios.
Mm-hmm. And what I hear you saying is that, and this is also advice that we've given to startups, when you're thinking about outsource versus bringing someone on, if the technology is your business, you need someone technical in your business. If there's a website or, digital marketing, things like that, those things I think are fine outsourced, but as you mentioned, you need someone full-time, especially if the technology is your business.
Right. I agree.
And also that, while you're working to raise the funds to bring that person in full-time, then bootstrapping with, and I love those examples about pitch competitions and other things, and, finding really creative ways to compensate technical people for their time while you're raising the funds to hire them full-time.
Yeah,
So
and I will say this. I would say don't underestimate college students. It can be a win-win situation. There's some very talented college students, and not just college students, but boot campers, like boot camp graduates, people that just kind of code. They're trying to get used to it or just getting started. Some of those people are very talented, and since they're just starting out, the cost won't be as high. But you can really grow and build that relationship, and that may end up being your CTO eventually. But like you said, college students just want a little extra cash most of the time, or people who are working and doing boot camps. Sometimes they just want a free meal. It just depends. And so again, like just being creative, having to think outside the box when you don't have money. That's something that I feel like we mastered. So yeah.
That's good. That's good. And I want to pause for just a second and let you guys know, please feel free to go ahead and ask your questions. I know several of you have questions for Dr. Sephus this morning. There is a Q&A feature on the bottom of your toolbar. Feel free to use that versus the chat. The chat is fine, but the Q&A feature will help us better keep track of your questions. So feel free to just do that throughout. So thank you for that, Dr. Sephus. And you talked a little bit about finding technical talent on the college campuses, working with entrepreneurs. I know that there is some stigma around that, around maybe their lack of experience or their commitment and dedication. So I'm glad that you addressed that. But in addition to finding talent on college campuses, how are some other ways that we can find technical talent?
So I think there's a lot of websites out there that you can see freelancers, a list of freelancers. So I think Stack Overflow has one. There's one that used to be called Odesk. I think they might have changed it to something else. There's so many out there that you can look up and see. Okay, type in, I need a website, for example, web developer, and you'll see a list of people that come up. That's usually how they work. And then you'll also not only see the person, their rates, as well as their expertise, but you'll also see ratings from other people who have looked at, who have worked with them. And again, like I said, I've had some great contractors I've worked with, and I've had some really terrible ones. I've had to fire a lot of people in my career. So unfortunately, but I think those ratings kind of really help. But again, it's just kind of hit or miss depending on what you want. You may not have the same type of skill set that the other person who worked with them before had. So take the ratings with a grain of salt, but at least it's something to kind of give you a data point for what is going on there. I think too, like your network is probably the best way to find someone. Reaching out through our network, I found a lot of the people that I hired at Park Pig at CTO in Atlanta were other colleagues that I went to school with at Georgia Tech. And so I ended up bringing on at least 2 or 3 others. We also used LinkedIn. We used a couple of other sites where you can put your job requisitions up, and then people can look and apply. And we got a really great candidate that way as well. I think I will say something about vetting tech talent, because some people, a lot of people have questions about that. So for example, most big companies like the Amazons, the Googles, when you apply for a job as a tech person, they give you a coding interview. So it can be like a whiteboarding coding interview, or it'll be at your computer, and they'll ask you, some coding questions, and you'll walk through. But I've actually found that those are not as effective for me, at least when I was CTO. I found that coming up with an actual scenario that might happen in your company. So for example, we came up with a project. If you had so many parts and you were trying to recognize, you're trying to distinguish the difference between 3 parts, what method would you go about? Here are some actual images of parts that you can use to test your algorithms with. What sort of metrics would you use to evaluate yourself, and how fast does your code run? And can you actually do a mini project, like take about a half a day or 2 hours, or whatever the normal length of interviews would be anyway, and just have them work on an actual project and submit a report back to you. And that actually told me a lot more about the candidate than just whiteboarding code, writing code from memory, which contrary to which most of the big companies use that method to vet. But I think actually what they'll be dealing with.
We're having a few technical difficulties. I do apologize for that. So love those recommendations about finding websites that can recommend technical talent. Someone wrote in the chat, Fiverr as another option for that. We talked about LinkedIn and paying attention to the ratings. And I really love what you said about the network, and trusting your network and utilizing your network to find that technical talent. And tell us, because I think that's how Jewel found you, is through some network, some connections through her network. Yeah. And we're getting a question in the Q&A that I would like to go ahead and pose here. This is a question about negotiating salary and equity and other benefits for a CTO. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so good question. So most of the time when you're a startup, let's say you're a startup and you, like a tech startup, most tech startups use the equity portion of the salary along with, regular base pay. And so you have to figure out what that equity percentage might be. And it can vary, depending on the type of company. Like, is the CTO the actual co-founder? If so, you want the equity to be, a little bit higher, slightly higher percentages. I would say most CTOs that are not co-founders, you'll probably see equity within the 5 to 10% range, maybe a little bit higher, maybe a little bit less, depending on their contribution. So it depends on their skill set. It depends on their experience in that particular thing that you need for your company. And it also depends on, how, being a CTO, you kind of have to be a little bit technical as well as a little bit business minded. And so is this person going to be able to help you with your roadmap, help you figure out the hard business decisions that are based on what's feasible in technology. And a lot of times like this, the CTO is going to help you create what goes into your MVP, your minimum viable product. And so, and by the way, I always say, in order to figure that out, you have to look at all the features that you want to do and usually your MVP is like a very small portion of that. So your very first version, and so that must include what's technically feasible, as well as what makes the most money and what affects the most amount of customers. And the CTO has to be thinking about all those things. So you want someone that's kind of well-rounded and balanced. And if they're not, if they're slightly more technical and they don't have that other side, then that can affect salary rates too, because that means someone else, you now have to pay someone else to kind of fill that goal.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. One sort of shoot from that question is what's the typical pay range for a CTO early in the startup stages?
Yeah, so that depends on a lot of things. So again, I speak from the perspective of tech startups, but there are also startups that are more just traditional small businesses, like say you have a smart bakery. I don't know what that would look like, but just for an example, or you have something like some device that you're selling that may be tech enabled, but not the main component isn't technology necessarily. And so I think, again, it depends on what is the CTO contributing. If they're part-time, then usually CTOs will ask for a contractor rate. And that can vary depending on their experience. I think I've seen for technical folks like engineers, and depending on their education level or boot camp level, it can range from, I've seen with students, maybe $20, $25 an hour on up to $150 an hour, $250 an hour for somebody who's been around a while. Now that's hourly contractor rates. But if you want to bring on somebody full time and you're a CTO, again, the higher the equity, the less the base pay of the salary. And so you kind of want to make those both equal out whatever the going rate is for that particular person. So, engineers, computer scientists, again, it depends on location and everything, but in the Southeast, I've seen everything from 75K on up to, 100K, 150K, 200K, and higher, and depends on the company. So again, if you're a startup, you kind of want to not pay them all. So here's the rule of thumb. If you don't want to give up equity, and you know that the technology is pretty straightforward to develop, like it's not research based, then it would probably be a little bit better to pay them hourly or to just pay them straight salary so that they don't take your equity. At that point, unfortunately for the CTO, they're dismissible or replaceable. But now if you have a technology company where the technology is really intense, it's really research-based, like the technology is the core of the business, then you want to make sure that person stays around. And so you want to kind of hook them a little bit with equity. And honestly, if they're the CTO and they believe in your company and what you're doing, they should want some of the equity because they believe that you're going to get acquired one day, or you're going to sell the company, or you're going to, make a lot more. And so that is usually how it goes in the startup world. But, there's so many different arrangements that people have to come up with to just be creative, especially right now in this economy. So yeah, just keep that in mind. But those are the usual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love your thoughts on them having that skin in the game as well, and that equity piece certainly does that. It motivates them, I think, to be efficient.
So I'll just say an example really quickly with that. Let's take Amazon for example. Amazon, every full-time employee that works at Amazon gets a percentage of Amazon stock. I think it's really similar at Walmart if you work for Walmart full-time, and several other companies too. I think even more so at Amazon, because that stock amount is actually a part of your base salary. I mean, it's actually a part of your total compensation salary. And they weigh a lot on that, and they hope that if you work hard and if you innovate and you do great things at Amazon, that stock price will continue to drive up. Whereas it looks like you're only making this amount. When you factor in the stock, you're really making more than everyone else. That's the idea. that Amazon, that's how they approach it. And so startup life is really similar.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Good point. Really good question from Erica Hemphill. Nashlie, what are your thoughts on grabbing talent from recent COVID layoffs at big tech brands like Airbnb and Lyft, Uber? What are your thoughts on finding or getting connected to those people?
Snatch them up as soon as you can. I think, ironically, I mean, for myself, for example, I feel like my workload has actually increased since COVID. And, I work from home, and maybe that's a part of it because people, they like to put, meetings on your calendar all day. But I think, there are a lot of people right now who are looking for roles, and technology roles are being filled really quickly. And keep this in mind too, especially right now, people are more open to things, especially like working from home, obviously, but be open to a part-time person. As long as you trust that person and they prove that they can handle their job responsibilities, they may need to work for several different companies in order to, make the salary that they're trying to make, or make the income that they're trying to bring in to replace that big company that they may have left. And so I would say just kind of be open to that, but be cautious that they're not overcommitting to other things and they're not able to deliver whatever that they're trying to deliver to you. Because that's a thing that we'll see a lot too, is that some, especially entrepreneurs, people who do tech consulting, sometimes, we don't want to leave any money on the table. And so we'll say yes to every project, yet we're steadily missing deadlines. And so when you start to notice that early on in your tech employees, like definitely call it out, definitely have a conversation with them about it, see what's going on, see, is this going to be something that they can prioritize when they start missing the first deadline, the second deadline. And then at that point, if it becomes a pattern, then, you just probably have to get rid of that person. We always say in the startup world, you hire slow and fire fast, because the longer that they're there and they're not achieving the goal, they're just taking money out of your company's pocket. And that's not good for anybody. So you want to make sure that you part ways and everybody's happier.
Good points. Yeah. And you sort of answered Jim Lowry's question about recommendations for managing teams remotely. Any other, those are all good points and good ways to kind of stay on top of folks, but any other recommendations about working with or managing technical teams remotely?
Yes, absolutely. So I've been a remote worker for Amazon for the past 3.5 years. So I definitely have lots of insight here. I have done things with my team. So that's my team in both Seattle, Washington, D.C., California, Bay Area, LA area. We've been able to do things like have what we call a stand-up meeting. And so that's usually every day, or you can do every other day, but every day everybody gets on a quick, no more than 10-15 minute call, and you go through each person. You say, okay, what did you do yesterday? What are you doing today? And were there any issues, like any blockers or issues that you can't, that cause you not to be able to do what you're supposed to be able to do? And if there are any issues, then you as a manager or you as the leader, that's your job to help remove those blockers so that those people can do their work. But every day we have that meeting. It's really quick. It's really short. Everybody just goes around, and then you can hold each other accountable that way. Because, I know we're all kind of at home and we're like, I don't feel like getting up today, or I don't feel like putting on pants or whatever, but you kind of have to, force yourself and get some accountability in there. So that just helps when you have a whole team of people listening to you say what you plan on doing today, and it helps out.
That's good. That's good. Awesome. We've got some other questions. What are some local programs in the Jackson area? We know that you're working with the Beam Path in Jackson currently, and so you're even though you're in Atlanta, you're still very well connected here. But what are some local programs in the Jackson area where folks can seek technical talent?
So there's the Mississippi Coding Academy. Those students are learning web development, Java. Um, they're doing things like React. So those are in app development, and so you can rely on them for things like that. You can also reach out to Jackson State University. They have a computer science department. And then there are several people that are just, I mean, Jackson, believe it or not, and Mississippi as a whole has, I think, a huge network of freelance app developers and coders and technologists. And these people are everywhere sometimes. They're not just, they're from Mississippi and based in Mississippi, but they move around and they work with people all over the country. And so I think that it's important to kind of be connected to those. The Jackson Area Web Developers Meetup Group, they have a lot of people in that group that are technical as well. JC Hyatt, definitely a good resource to kind of reach out to. And Kayla Sween, those are just some of the people off the top of my head. There was recently a conference called Magnolia JS. You can look it up in Mississippi, but it was a conference, a tech conference based in Jackson, and a lot of developers signed in to those newsletters and reaching out to those people and kind of soliciting from that list of folks, I think would be a good idea to find that talent. And again, just, use your network, reach out to people. We at the Beam Path definitely have connected several people with developers for whatever their needs are, whether it's web development, app development, or just coding classes. So feel free to connect with us. It's thebeampath.org for that.
Awesome. One question that I don't want to pass, it was sort of moved from the management of the technical team discussion, but I do want to grab this question. What would you say is a good amount of time or number of projects that would be sufficient to measure if someone will work or not as a CTO? What's a good amount of, I guess, what's the right balance or what's the right amount to see if someone is able to handle it, is I'm thinking the question there.
Well, it sounds like they're kind of getting at, what would be the normal time commitment for a CTO or someone on the tech team. And again, it depends on what you're doing. Generally speaking, as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, there is no limit to the time that you have to put in. You just have to put in however much time it takes. And sometimes that takes 16-hour days. Sometimes that takes working on a couple Saturdays or working until you get the deadline complete, so that you can raise the next round of funding, so you can enter into the pitch competition, so you can solidify that pilot customer or whatever that deadline may be. The amount of time it can vary, but it's whatever it takes. I think for full-time folks, you're expecting them to, of course, to work a normal work day, plus some. To be honest, I think that's the typical expectation for working at a startup. You kind of know that you're going to be working a lot, which is opposed to like a corporate company like corporate America or Amazon or Google, where I actually don't spend that much time outside the normal workday doing my job, and I have more flexibility and more work-life balance. But as a startup CTO or CEO even, you're gonna be putting in a lot of hours.
Okay. And one other question back on the equity piece. Do you recommend equity after being vested for a certain period of time, or should you just go ahead and think about that initially when you're bringing on a CTO?
It sort of, so I think with the situation with ParkPick, the startup, we had just sort of bootstrapped and had been doing side contract work to get the initial prototype. And once we had that prototype, so I guess your prototype would be whatever you need to move you on to the next step, whether that's landing an investor or landing an advisor or being able to be admitted into an incubator program or an accelerator program. So that's kind of what your prototype would be, which is not the same as your MVP. So it's usually much earlier. Before that, usually nobody is full time because, you know, assuming you still have responsibilities and financial responsibilities, so you're trying to maintain probably some other source of funding. But once you have a good idea of how you can start getting funding for your own business, you know, then I would say, you know, make that decision when you want to make that jump, leaving your full time and get into, you know, work more on your business. But yeah, I hope I answered the question.
No, I think that's good. And again, on that period of time when you're raising those funds and you need someone on board, we talked about competitions and other ways to kind of bootstrap and pull together some funding and other creative ways. What other ways would you recommend folks can maximize seed funding when they're working with or find seed funding when they're working with a shorter time frame?
Right. So I think, you know, pitch competitions obviously worked for us. Um, the people often say, you know, fake it till you make it. So even if you don't have the full version of it, and I saw somebody ask about prototype versus MVP, the prototype is just something that gives whoever you're trying to convince an idea of what you're doing, something tangible they can hold in their hand or play with. Even if it's just a cup, sometimes, you know, if it has to be, then that's, you know, that's fine. But I think, I forgot what I was gonna say, Ashley. But anyway, so yeah, you can create that prototype, and I think sometimes it doesn't take a lot of money, but sometimes it does. So it just, again, it depends on what you're doing. But I think you're definitely gonna need to secure some. Let's just, you know, maybe you're in a cab, saved up a lot of money. You knew you were gonna be an entrepreneur, and so you know, you didn't have to raise a lot of money, and you were able to bootstrap and fully from the beginning to very end MVP stage and to your generate revenue for, you know, have, but there's C fund say comes again words so C in North Angel Fund, Angel well on those earlier steps to fund. Definitely those opportunities. There'd be a lot more funding. In local state area.
We're still having some technical difficulties with the audio. And I heard bits and pieces of what Nashlie's answer was. But we're gonna get those answers and type them or in the chat or send those to you guys by email afterwards. But I heard things like angel funds, and there are other things, accelerator programs, seed fund programs
Hey, can you hear
that
me?
I think folks. Yes, yes, yes. I'm sorry. That last answer, it broke up a lot there. We can only hear bits and
Okay.
pieces of that.
Oh, no, sorry about that. Not sure what happened, but yeah, I was just saying that there are seed funds available. Definitely keep your eyes and ears open about what the state and local legislators are doing about these the COVID times and fundings and grants coming from that as well. So.
Mhm, mhm. And I do want to talk a little bit about, we typed in the chat some of those local resources that you were talking about. Tell us a little bit more about the Beam Path, what you guys are doing, and also how do you make connections or match make people with technical talent?
Right. So the Bean Path is a nonprofit based in Jackson, and we sow technical expertise in order to fertilize communities. And so we essentially do what we call tech office hours every second Saturday. We've been doing them virtually, but normally we'll have them in the local libraries in Jackson and around that area. The idea is to actually the virtual ones have been working out really well, but we have lots of tech experts waiting to sit down and talk to you about whatever it is that you have a question about. You may be an older person, a senior citizen, or a younger person interested in getting into technology. You may also, just kind of be a non-tech person and you're kind of scared or not or intimidated. And so we provide a safe space for you to learn about, how you can use technology to advance your business, mentoring, guidance. If you need a website, usually we can guide you through that. And so different things like that. And so, yeah, I forgot the second part of your question.
Oh, how do you connect people with technical talent?
Oh, okay. So so if you come in for tech office hours, for example, you have an idea, you want to run it by us, or you have some tech need that needs to be developed, then we have several people that we've worked with and partnered with, most of them in the Mississippi area. So we'll connect you with that person and we'll basically try to see what stage you're at. So like you very early, like idea concept stage, or are you pretty much almost done? You already have a website, you already have a framework, you just need help with this one thing. And so we'll give you a very specific tech expert that can help with that. But most of the time, people just need kind of general guidance and, or some mentoring, or just need to know about certain tools that already exist. And we try to, point you to things that are not gonna, break your bank, in other words, and are, pretty much free and available.
Awesome. Very essential part of the Mississippi innovation ecosystem. So we thank you for bringing your talent and your expertise back to Mississippi and developing the Bean Path to be able to provide those services to folks back here in Mississippi. One other question we got through the Q&A is how do you bridge the gap to communicate with the CEO and other non-technical individuals to keep the company moving forward? I think that's a really good one.
Right. So we often we joke about how the CEO and the CTO, especially if the CEO is non-technical, often bump heads, but it's in a good way, because you want to constantly be challenging each other and making sure that all the decisions that are being made are right for the company. So I think things to keep in mind as a CTO when you're the only one in the C-suite who has a technical background, which is the case that I was in. You want to make sure that, when you're talking to your CEO or your COO or your VP of product, that you're not like throwing in like all these technical terms that nobody knows what it means, which it may be really cool and may really, you may be really excited about it. But keep in mind, they just want to know the very high level, okay, is this going to work when I need it to work? That's pretty much all they want to know. And so, you can find a balance depending on their technical expertise. But yeah, just keep that in mind. A lot of people, once you start talking about complex things, you're going to lose folks and they're not going to want to talk to you anymore. But hopefully you don't have a CTO that's like that. Again, the CTO kind of has to be well balanced and be able to speak both languages, because you're thinking about the CTO as the quarterback, right? So you got to be able to talk to the coach, communicate, and execute to the players. Now, for the CEO and the COO, things to keep in mind when you're talking to your CTO, make it clear what your goals are and what the timelines are. And then I would recommend not switching back and forth. Once you figure out something and you all agree on something, unless you really just have to because of financial reasons, stick to it. Because changing the technical roadmap is like steering a ship. Once you invest a lot of time into something, like I said, only if you have to, but ideally you don't want to do that. Once you invest a lot of time in something as a tech team, it takes a lot to undo that. It takes a lot to change it. And you're going to spend a lot of overhead trying to change directions. So there's something called the shiny object syndrome. You want to make sure you don't have that because, again, the more you change directions, the more you're slowing things up. So those are just some things to keep in mind.
I love that. I love that. Clear goals, just making sure everyone's on the same page. And another key element that you touched on was making sure that your CTO has both good business skills as well as technical skills, because like you said, they've got to be the communicator to both management or the rest of the non-technical team, as well as the folks that are executing. So good points, good points. Well, thank you so much. I know we're coming up on our time here. If there are any other questions, can we reach out to you, Dr. Sephus, to ask those other questions after the webinar?
Sure. And I apologize for any technical difficulties, but you're welcome to email me at info@thebeampath.org, or just go to our website, thebeampath.org. We have a contact page on there. You can kind of fill it out and tell us about what you need. If you have any tech needs or tech help, definitely sign up for our tech office hours. We have several slots, 20-minute slots, coming up on the second Saturday in June, and that form is already on our website if you want to sign up. Also, if you like to volunteer as a tech expert, we'd love to have you, especially once we start back in person at the libraries. That sign-up sheet is also on our website to volunteer. As always, we'll take donations. You can feel free to do that. We use PayPal or several other methods. We're also an Amazon Smile organization. So when you buy things on Amazon, a percentage goes to the Bean Path. So you can sign up, add the Bean Path as one of your organizations on Amazon Smile. And again, like, just feel free to reach out. We'd love to help. And thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Dr. Sephus and the Bean Path.
I'm sorry, I forgot. One more thing I forgot. You can follow us on social media at the Bean Path on most social media platforms, Twitter, we're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. We also just released a scholarship application for high school seniors. For those of you who are in have high school seniors in the Jackson Public Schools, feel free to take a look at our application for scholarships. And lastly, if you'd like to follow me, at Phenom and Nashlie, which is Phenom Nashlie, on Instagram, Twitter. I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn as well. So
awesome. Thank you so much, and thank you for being a partner of Innovate Mississippi, and thank you for all the amazing work that you're doing in Mississippi and for technology companies everywhere. Thank you so much. And we appreciate everyone who joined us today. Thank you so much. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to Nashlie or myself. And we hope to see you in 2 weeks for our next webinar that's going to be on raising investment funds. So look for that on our website and sign up for that. And we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you so much for joining us.